One of the most talked about names in football just had a birthday. But it wasn't the candles or the cake that caught everyone's attention. It was the timing. While debates swirl online, draft conversations stay quiet, and opinions about his future feel louder than ever, Shedeur Sanders was caught in a moment nobody expected, laughing, joking, and moving like none of the outside noise existed. No press conference, no polished statement, just a raw, unfiltered exchange with his brother that instantly set social media off. And that's what made people stop scrolling. Because for someone constantly labeled as controversial, overhyped, or too confident, this moment didn't fit the narrative at all. It felt real, almost too real. Fans weren't just watching a birthday clip. They were watching a side of Shedeur that rarely makes headlines, especially when pressure is at its highest. What stood out wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. No talk about contracts, no mention of critics, no defensive energy, just brotherly jokes, awkward laughs, and a vibe that felt oddly calm considering everything happening behind the scenes. And almost immediately, people started asking the same question in the comments. Why now? Some fans believe moments like this surface right before major turning points. Others think it exposed a disconnect between how Shedeur is portrayed and who he actually is when the cameras aren't trying to frame a storyline. And a few went even further, suggesting this clip quietly challenged the way the football world has been talking about him all along. Of course, nothing's been confirmed. This is just what people are saying. But one thing is clear, this wasn't just a birthday moment. It became a conversation. And once you notice what fans caught in the background, the entire clip feels different. Because what happened next only added fuel to the debate. What made this birthday moment hit wasn't the cake, the jokes, or even who was in the room. It was the fact that it happened at all. Shedeur Sanders has spent the last few years living under a microscope. Every throw gets dissected, every quote gets clipped, every reaction gets turned into a debate. So when this clip surfaced, raw, messy, and completely unserious, people froze. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was. There was no polish here, no image management, no forced message. Just two brothers talking trash, laughing too loud, and acting like the outside world didn't exist. And that's exactly why fans couldn't look away. In a space where athletes are constantly branded, coached, and filtered, this moment felt almost uncomfortable in its honesty. Viewers weren't reacting to what Shedeur did. They were reacting to what he didn't do. He didn't posture. He didn't lean into the spotlight. He didn't address critics or explain himself. He just existed. And strangely enough, that silence spoke louder than any press statement ever could. For someone who's often painted as calculated or media-trained, this clip flipped the script entirely. That's when the comments started shifting. People weren't just saying, "Happy birthday." They were asking why this version of Shedeur rarely shows up in headlines. Why moments like this don't fit the image that's constantly pushed. And why something so simple felt so revealing. Some fans said it reminded them that behind the takes, the stats, and the noise, there's still a young guy navigating pressure most people never experience. Others went further, suggesting this clip exposed a disconnect between who Shedeur is and how he's talked about. Not facts, just observations, but enough to spark conversation. And then there was the timing. Because this didn't surface during a win streak or a celebration. It showed up during uncertainty, during questions about what's next, during a stretch where silence from decision makers has only made fans more restless. That's why people leaned in. Not because it was flashy, but because it felt like the calm before something bigger. This wasn't just a birthday clip. It became a pause in the chaos. And once people noticed how comfortable he looked in that pause, it led to an even bigger question. What else are we missing when we only look at the headlines? What really pulled people in wasn't the setting or the celebration. It was the dynamic. From the very first exchange, it was obvious this wasn't staged. No polished energy. No camera awareness. Just two brothers talking the way brothers actually talk, joking too long, roasting each other, cutting each other off, and laughing at things that probably wouldn't make sense to anyone else. And that's exactly why it worked. Fans immediately picked up on how natural it felt. The teasing wasn't performative. The laughter wasn't forced. There were awkward pauses, half-finished jokes, and moments that would normally be edited out of a clean social media clip. But none of that was removed. And strangely enough, those imperfections made the moment hit harder. People online started pointing out something subtle but important. Shedeur wasn't leading the moment. He wasn't controlling the vibe or shaping the narrative. He was just reacting, letting someone else talk over him, letting the moment breathe. That's not how someone acts when they're worried about optics. And that's what made the clip feel different. In a world where athletes are trained to protect their image at all costs, this looked like someone who felt safe enough to let their guard down. Safe enough to be the younger brother again. Safe enough to joke, lose an argument, and laugh it off without worrying how it would be perceived. That comfort level didn't go unnoticed. Fans began saying this kind of chemistry doesn't exist if someone is as manufactured as critics claim. Others said it showed grounding, the kind that doesn't come from branding teams or media coaching, but from family that treats you the same whether you're trending or not. None of this is confirmed, of course, just the read people had. And then there was the contrast. The same person who's often described as arrogant or distant suddenly looked relaxed and self-aware, not trying to prove anything, not trying to win the room, just being present. For some viewers, that was the most revealing part of the entire clip. It raised an uncomfortable question for critics. If this is who he is when the cameras aren't framing a storyline, how much of the narrative we hear is actually real? That question lingered, and it only got louder when people started paying attention to when this moment happened, because the timing made the brotherly bond feel less like coincidence and more like context. For a long time now, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders hasn't really been about football. It's been about perception. Depending on who you listen to, he's labeled confident or cocky, charismatic or calculated, a leader or a distraction. And once a narrative like that takes hold, every clip gets filtered through it. A smile becomes arrogance. Silence becomes entitlement. Confidence becomes controversy. That's the version of Shedeur many people think they know. But moments like this birthday clip complicate that picture in a way that's hard to ignore, because nothing about it matched the tone that usually surrounds his name. There was no edge, no bravado, no attempt to command attention. Instead, he blended into the background of his own moment. And that contrast is exactly what caught people off guard. Fans started pointing out how rarely the quieter side of Shedeur gets airtime. When he's not celebrating a win or answering loaded questions, those moments don't trend. They don't get dissected. They don't fit the storyline, so they disappear. What remains is a version shaped by headlines, not habits. Some reports claim that perception has followed him longer than people realize, that once an athlete is framed a certain way, it sticks, regardless of context. Fair or not, that's the environment he's been navigating. And that's why this clip mattered more than it should have. Because it wasn't defensive. He didn't try to soften his image. He didn't overcorrect. He didn't explain himself. He simply existed in a space where he didn't have to perform. And that absence of performance told its own story. Viewers started asking uncomfortable questions. If this is how he moves when nothing's on the line, how much of the criticism is based on moments taken out of context? How often do we confuse confidence with ego when we're already expecting to see it? Of course, none of this proves anything. It doesn't erase mistakes. It doesn't guarantee anything about the future. But it does reveal something important, that the person behind the narrative isn't nearly as one-dimensional as he's often portrayed. And once people noticed that gap between the image and the reality, it shifted the conversation. Because when perception starts to crack, timing suddenly matters. And the fact that this moment surfaced now, not earlier, not later, made fans wonder if there was more happening beneath the surface than anyone was saying out loud. What really pushed this clip into a different category was when it showed up. If this birthday moment had surfaced during a winning streak or right after a big announcement, it probably would have been brushed off as just another feel-good clip. But that's not when it happened. It appeared during a stretch where questions around Shedeur Sanders feel louder than answers, and fans noticed immediately. Online, people started pointing out the silence surrounding his next move. No clear updates, no steady stream of confirmation, just speculation filling the gaps. And in moments like that, even the smallest details start to feel bigger than they are. That's where the theories came in. Some fans said the timing felt intentional, even if it was. Others suggested moments like this tend to surface right before a shift, not because they're planned, but because people start looking for meaning when uncertainty drags on. To be clear, none of this is confirmed. These are just interpretations floating around. But the pattern felt familiar to longtime football fans. Whenever an athlete's future feels unresolved, attention naturally shifts away from stats and toward body language, mood, and energy. People start reading between the lines. And in this clip, Shedeur didn't look tense. He didn't look distracted. He didn't look like someone spiraling under pressure. If anything, he looked grounded. That contrast sparked debate. Some viewers argued that the calm was a sign of confidence, that he knows more than the public does. Others thought it showed acceptance, a mindset of staying present regardless of what's coming next. A few even questioned whether the lack of visible urgency said more about the situation than any report could. Again, speculation, nothing more. But what made the timing stand out wasn't just league-related chatter. It was the emotional layer. A birthday, family, prayer, support. Those are the kinds of moments people lean into when the future feels uncertain. And whether intentional or not, that context changed how the clip was received. Instead of being seen as random, it felt reflective. Fans weren't just reacting to the video. They were projecting their own concerns onto it. Their own frustration with the unknown, their own belief that talent doesn't always align with opportunity. And suddenly, a casual birthday moment became a symbol of something bigger. Not proof, not evidence, just a moment landing at the exact time people were already asking questions. And once that connection was made, attention shifted again, away from timing, and toward the quiet support surrounding him. Because that might have been the most important part of the entire clip. What many people missed on the first watch wasn't the jokes or the laughter. It was the support woven quietly through the moment. Buried inside all the humor was something more serious, a tone shift that didn't demand attention, but earned it. The kind of support that doesn't show up in stat sheets or headlines. The kind that only matters when pressure starts stacking up and answers don't come easily. When the conversation drifted toward faith and prayer, fans leaned in. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt real. There was no speech, no big declaration, just acknowledgement. A reminder that behind the public debate, there's a private process happening that nobody else gets to see. That resonated. Viewers started pointing out how different this support felt compared to the noise surrounding his career. Online, everything is loud. Opinions are aggressive. Takes are rushed. But here, the energy slowed down. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about reassurance, the kind that doesn't need validation. Some fans interpreted this as grounding. Others saw it as preparation. A few suggested it looked like someone being reminded of who they are before whatever comes next. None of that is confirmed, of course, but the emotion was clear enough that people felt it without being told what to feel. And that's what made the moment powerful. There was no sense of panic, no desperation, no visible frustration. If anything, it felt like a reset, a pause where support mattered more than outcomes. In a league where careers can hinge on timing and perception, that kind of stability can be rare. People also noticed who wasn't speaking. No outside voices, no advisors, no media presence guiding the moment, just family. And that isolation from the noise made everything feel heavier in the best way, like this was happening regardless of whether anyone was watching. Fans began saying this was the side of the story they wish they saw more often, not just for Shedeur, but for athletes in general. The part where confidence isn't loud, where strength doesn't need an audience, where belief exists even when certainty doesn't. And that's when the conversation shifted again. Because once you recognize that level of support behind the scenes, it reframes everything else. The patience, the calm, the lack of reaction to criticism. Suddenly, it doesn't look like avoidance, it looks like trust. And that raised the next question fans couldn't ignore. With this kind of foundation behind him, does he really belong on the outside looking in? At some point, the conversation always circles back to the same question. Does Shedeur Sanders actually deserve another shot? It's a question fans have been asking louder lately, especially after moments like this surfaced. Not because a birthday clip proves anything on the field, it doesn't, but because it reignited a debate that never really went away. Talent versus opportunity, performance versus perception, and whether those two things have ever truly lined up in his case. Supporters argue the answer is obvious. They point to his body of work, his composure under pressure, and the leadership traits that don't always show up in highlight reels. They say plenty of players have landed roster spots with less production and fewer expectations, while Shedeur continues to sit in a gray area where opinions outweigh patience. To them, it feels less like a football decision and more like hesitation rooted in narrative. On the other side, critics push back. They argue the league is ruthless for a reason. That opportunity isn't owed, it's earned repeatedly. They say teams see things fans don't, and if doors haven't opened yet, there must be reasons behind the scenes. Fair or not, that's the reality of professional football. But here, where things get complicated. Even among skeptics, there's acknowledgement that situations matter. Fit matters, timing matters. And sometimes the gap between being good enough and getting the call isn't about ability at all, it's about trust. Trust in how a player will handle a locker room, media pressure, expectations that follow them everywhere. That's why this discussion keeps resurfacing. Because moments like this birthday clip don't argue his case with stats, they humanize it. They remind people that development isn't always linear, and readiness isn't always loud. Some fans believe the calm, grounded version of Shedeur shown here is exactly what teams say they want. Others aren't convinced it changes anything. And that split is the story. There's no confirmation that a call is coming, no sign that decisions have already been made, just opinions clashing in the absence of clarity. But one thing is undeniable, the demand for answers is growing. Not because of hype, not because of a viral moment, but because enough people believe the conversation around him never fully closed. And whether the league agrees or not, that belief is what keeps the question alive. Because once fans start asking if someone deserves another shot, they're really asking why they haven't gotten one yet. In the end, this birthday moment won't be remembered because of the jokes, the cake, or even who was in the room. It'll be remembered because of when it happened and what it quietly revealed. At a time when everything around Shedeur Sanders feels uncertain, this clip showed something rare: stillness. No scrambling to control the narrative, no visible frustration, no urgency to explain himself to anyone, just presence. And in a world that constantly demands answers, that kind of calm stands out. For fans, it became a reminder that careers aren't lived in headlines. They're lived in moments like this, away from cameras meant to judge, away from conversations that reduce people to opinions. What made this clip resonate wasn't that it changed anyone's mind overnight. It's that it made people pause. Pause before assuming, pause before labeling, pause before writing the story too early. Some viewers will see this as nothing more than a normal family moment, and that's fair. Others will read deeper into it, seeing reassurance, patience, and quiet belief during a stretch where noise could have taken over. Neither side is wrong. That's what makes the moment powerful. It reflects whatever question the viewer already has. But here's what can't be ignored. This clip humanized a conversation that's often stripped of humanity. It reminded people that behind every debate about readiness or opportunity is a person still living life in real time, still laughing, still leaning on family, still grounded enough to let the future arrive when it arrives. And maybe that's why it stuck. Because long after stats are forgotten and arguments fade, people remember how someone carried themselves when the path wasn't clear. They remember composure. They remember support. They remember moments that felt honest when everything else felt forced. There's no guarantee this moment leads to anything concrete. No promise that it changes outcomes or accelerates decisions. But it doesn't need to. Its impact is already there, in the way it shifted tone, softened edges, and reminded people that not every chapter is loud. Sometimes, the moments that matter most are the quiet ones. And when the next chapter finally does arrive, this clip will still be there, not as proof of anything, but as a snapshot of who he was right before everything changed.